Hi, welcome to Shanta Lakshmi IAS. We will be discussing the 2021 UPSC Civil Services Preliminary Examination Economy, the part of economy. Maybe you might have noticed the fact that out of 15 questions, around 4 or 5 questions happens to be factual and rest of the question happens to be purely based on concepts. And that's what I've been telling to my students since when it comes to economics, 9 out of 10 questions you could expect is mostly based on how things work in an economy. So that's what I mean to say, conceptual oriented. And then you will be thinking there are some factual questions in economy. They didn't ask you a fact, some like what is the growth rate of India somewhere in 66. They didn't ask you about the growth rate of India in 1970, or they didn't ask you about the rate of inflation in 2020 at least. They have asked you some questions, of course they are factual, but they happen to do something with the current issues. Take the case of Union Cooperative Banks. Urban cooperative banks. That's been in the news. You might have gone through what's happening in Maharashtra, isn't it? So anyone whoever happens to go through newspaper for the past 1 year, maybe he might happen to collect this fact. What's the issue related to the cooperative banks and especially the urban cooperative banks in Maharashtra, isn't it? And what is the reaction of the government and the RBI? So that itself would throw you a light. And why the government or the UPSC happened to pick up that particular question. The same is the logic that you apply for rest of the factual questions. They happen to do something with the current affairs. That's it. So now start with the first question. Take the case. They consider the following statements. The governor of RBI is appointed by the central government. Maybe those of you who studied polity, you might not have come across, isn't it, anything like this, unlike the Supreme Court Chief Justice, who has a security of tenure and there's been an appointment process. I don't think you might have come across, and at least for the past 4 to 5 years, you being coming across this piece of news, isn't it? So when Raghuram Rajan has not given an extension, the media happened to criticize that why is it such a great person has not given an extension, because ideally, my friends, in India, the government appoints the RBI governor for 3 years and the government is happy with the government is happy with the governor, then he would get an extension of 2 years. This is the process, that's it. Of course, there is nothing like a rule in constitution that he has a fixed tenure. And then hardly, I guess, those who studied polity from any textbook, I don't really think you might have come across a fact that like Supreme Court Chief Justice or the chairman of UPSC or the CAG, they has a fixed tenure, isn't it? So they are not entitled, and there's hardly anything that constitution says about their tenure or simply the entitlements. So it's a very basic fact that every one of you might happen to. And in fact, the question itself is very simple question. But the only thing UPSC happened to do is simply happen to throw a trap. Because under such immense pressure, most of you might end up overreading it, might surpass certain terms in the question and you end up falling a trap. I don't really think this is a question that only a guy or who is an expert in economy could answer it. Any mediocre student could get to know, isn't it? But if you look at the second statement, what does it say? Certain provisions in the Constitution of India give the central government the right to issue directions to the RBI in public interest. So that is where, in fact, that's the reason I use the word called trap, because this is where the UPSC deliberately happened to place this word constitution. Most of the students under the immense pressure in the preliminary examination might have gone for an overlook of this particular term. Of course, every one of us is aware of the fact that government of India, in the interest of the economy, has every right to issue directions, isn't it? But the right, absolutely happens to come from the RBI Act itself. Within the RBI Act, it's been clearly mentioned the government at times necessary could invoke certain articles within the RBI Act and issue directions to the public in the interest of the public, but that's what you don't find it in a constitution. So deliberately placing the word constitution, they happen to throw you in a trap, that's it. Except this particular trap or this word, there's hardly any complexity in it. And those people who ever happen to notice this could obviously eliminate the second option. And imagine if you could eliminate the second option, does mean you could eliminate the option A, option B, option D. So whichever option you have 2 and C 2 happens to be not the right statement, then you could eliminate A, B, D, and obviously without reading the third statement, you could make it answer, C happens to be the most appropriate answer. To be frank, I don't think you don't need to. The governor of RBI draws power from RBI Act. Again, that's a very common fact, everyone knows. But here in this case, I really think, if you have noticed this word and you eliminated option 2, then obviously, okay, hardly a fraction of second, C could be the most appropriate. That's it. And I guess you are aware of the fact why I am using this word called the most appropriate. Okay, so now let's look at the second question. With reference to casual workers employed in India, consider the following statements. I guess you understand the very basic difference between a casual worker and a permanent worker, isn't it? All casual workers are entitled for employees' provident fund coverage. All casual workers are entitled for regular working hours and overtime payment. Okay, so this is again a factual question, and because of the recent changes in the Labour Act, okay, so labor laws you might also have, because the reforms after the current government, I mean after India happens to come to power, they might have, I mean you might be aware of the fact they happen to bring in reforms in land, they have to bring in reforms, they try to bring some reforms in capital markets, they also started bringing some reforms in labor, isn't it? Maybe you might have heard about the issue related to land acquisition, what reforms are, what changes the government happened to propose. So again, this been in the news, isn't it? And most of the students have been confused with the government can by a notification specify that an establishment or industry shall pay wages only through its bank account. So some of the question happened to ask me, how could a government has a right to dictate, how could a private company, let's say imagine if it is a private company, how could a private company, isn't it? How could a government dictate a private company, how should they happen to disburse salaries to their employees? Isn't does the government has a role to? Of course, we have every company, no matter whether it's a private company, public company, everyone has to abide by the Companies Act, that's it. But beyond that, if you could notice, mere common sense help us, this could be the most appropriate answer, because look at it, the government is trying to ensure that the economy no longer would be a cash intensive economy. If the government is happy, okay, people paying money through a BHIM, or I mean to say, isn't it, through BHIM or National Payment Corporation of India, no matter whatever the app you happen to use, payment app you use. So if the government want every transaction to be noted, don't you really think the government would be much happy? Isn't it? So, and you know that if the salaries are not paid through salaries, maybe most of the companies might take an advantage and simply, without simply employing any people, they might end up simply reporting that they are making large amount of payments in cash to their casual employees, and that is how, without a proper accounting, they might end up simply siphoning funds, isn't it? So mere common sense helps us realize the fact, isn't it? So most of you would be thinking, yes, these two statements would be absolutely right, because a casual worker is supplementing the permanent worker, isn't it? But this is where you might be having a confusion. And if you are not aware of the fact, isn't it? So you might be having whether 3 right or wrong, that's not the confusion. So you would be having, let's say, B, C, D, because that's where you have 3%. But if you could apply a logic, a common sense, mere common sense, isn't it? The government is trying to do everything possible to ensure the economy would no longer be a cash intensive economy. People end up using, okay, digital payments, isn't it? And you know the extent to which the digital payments are increasing in this country. In such case, how do you really think government simply, okay, leaves this loophole for the companies where they could simply get an advantage of siphoning lot of funds in the name of paying salaries, isn't it? So that's the basic reason. You could use the same logic and you could obviously make a guess that even statement 3 happens to be the most appropriate, isn't it? So that gives you the answer 1, 2 and 3. I mean, okay, option D happens to be the most appropriate. Okay, now let's look at the third question. Which of the following steps is most likely to be taken at the time of economic recession? Again, recession simply it has been any economy experiencing a fall in production or negative growth. Isn't it? Recession, depression, slowdown, these are the terms every student might be aware of it. So at times when the economy is underperforming, like you or me personally, okay, because of your health related issues, if you are underperforming, isn't it? Mostly in your academics, if you are underperforming, someone would be motivating, either your class teacher or your parents, isn't it? The same is the case when an economy which has a potential to grow at 10-12% is underperforming, in fact experiencing a fall in production, okay, month on month, then definitely what is the best thing the government could do, or what is that you could do, isn't it? Cutting tax rates accompanied by increase in interest rates. So here in this case, what is they saying? Cutting tax rates. Of course, you cut down the taxes. Okay, let's say if you cut down the indirect taxes, obviously what is going to happen? The market price of goods and services decreases. Maybe that might result in demand. But at the same time, he also added accompanied by increase in interest rate. And you know the fact that in the interest rates increases, isn't it? Tell me who would be the person happy to borrow when the rates of interest is high? How many people would be willing to buy a home loan mortgage at 20-30% rate of interest? And which investor would like to borrow money at 20-30% rate of interest, isn't it? So obviously, if you want to stimulate an economy, the best thing to do is cut down not only taxes, okay, isn't it? Who could cut taxes in this country? The government. That's the reason we call it a fiscal stimulus. Any initiative by government to stimulate economy, we call it a fiscal stimulus. Any initiative by the RBI to stimulate the economy, we call it a monetary stimulus. So you look at it, one way you are reducing taxes and increasing the demand, but the other way you are increasing interest rates, isn't it? So let's keep that aside. Increase in expenditure on public projects. So look at it, okay, cutting tax rates to an extent might increase the demand, but increase in interest rates would have an adverse effect, isn't it? But this statement, increase in expenditure on public projects. It's as simple as that. What if the government starts spending more on railways, roadways, isn't it? So obviously when the government spending, any penny the government spends, at the end of the day, it results in creating a demand within the economy. So when you look at A and B, I think, okay, B happens to be the most appropriate. Now, but let's look at even C and D. Increase in tax rates accompanied by reduction of interest rate. Again, that's going to be the same, isn't it? The other way, you are increasing the tax rates, maybe whether direct or indirect taxes, so that leaves the people's affordability, that reduces the people's affordability because the prices of goods and services increases if you increase the indirect taxes, or if you increase the direct taxes, the disposable income of the people decreases, isn't it? Henceforth, even C happens to be not the reduction of expenditure on public projects. If the government itself stops spending, then how do you really think an underperforming economy could be revived, isn't it? So henceforth, the most appropriate answer happens to be B. Okay, now let's look at this next question. Consider the following statements. Other things remains unchanged. Market demand for a good might increase. So most of you might be thinking, okay, for those of you who might not have spent some time on microeconomics, because people started simply saying, again, this question for the first time UPSC, okay, it's an exception that UPSC in the recent past never asked a question microeconomics. Okay, so that's the reason some students said it has been out of syllabus more or less, because if you look at the trend, UPSC never touches microeconomics. But you don't need to be an expert in microeconomics to understand these things. Other things remain unchanged. Okay, so what are the other things? That might be the other, okay. So generally, if you look at the law of demand, it is defined as ceteris paribus, it has been keeping everything constant. The demand for a good increases with fall in price and decreases with increase in price. So what are the other things constant? So you don't need to worry. In fact, you are not aware of it, you could still apply common sense, mere basic logic, and could still. I think every one of you could understand the difference between a substitute and a complement. Take the case, let's start with, okay. So just forget about, okay, remove this in your mind, from your mind, that you are not aware of what are the other things remaining constant does mean. What does the other things mean? Okay, chalta, okay. Now let's look at the statement, price of its substitute increases. Because okay, the question says, what results in increasing demand for a good? What results in increase in demand for a particular commodity or a particular service? Price of its substitute increases. When the price of its substitute, what is the substitute? I guess you are aware of the difference between a substitute and a complement. Substitute has been a good which could be replaced with other. Of course, a product cannot be 100% replaced with other. Of course, an onion from one vegetable vendor could be replaced with an onion from other vegetable vendor. But I don't call them as a supplements. Let's say tea and coffee. Those people who happen to have the habit of drinking tea, okay, in case there's no tea available, isn't it? They are the one who would like to go for replace tea with a coffee if necessary, isn't it? So there are such kind of goods which could to an extent replace the other good, is what we call as a substitute. Like petrol, diesel. Of course, if you have a petrol car, okay, at times petrol, you don't have a petrol available, I don't really think you use diesel for it, but a petrol car and a diesel car. If you think petrol car is relatively costly, then people might go for diesel. Or petrol market, the price of petrol is costly, and henceforth maintenance of a petrol car is going to be little bit, okay, little bit costly. Then people go for a diesel vehicle, isn't it? So the same logic holds good. When I say substitute has been a good which could replace the other. Take the case of tea and coffee. Tea and coffee are the perfect examples of substitutes. So obviously apply the same logic. What if the price of coffee increases? What if the price of coffee increases, isn't it? So those people happen to have the habit of taking tea or coffee. If the price of coffee enormously rises, obviously that results in increase in demand for the substitute. If the price of, okay, take the case of diesel cars increases, people obviously look for a petrol car. If the price of petrol car happens to enormously rise, then people move to diesel car. That's it. So if the price of the substitute increases, then the demand for the commodity obviously rises, because people would be willing to buy this rather than the substitute. So hence what option 1 happens to be. Price of its complement increases. Complement is something that goes with the other commodity. When I say complement has been, you need the other product or other good to happen to make a better use of this good. Like I could say a mobile phone and a SIM card, a pen and a notebook. Obviously, when the price of your notebook increases, isn't it? When the price of your notebook increases and you need a pen or a pencil, isn't it? So in this case, when the price of the notebook rises, obviously what does the law of demand says? Rise in price of a product decreases the consumption. Similarly, when the notebook price happens to experience a rise, that obviously decreases not only the demand for a notebook, it also decreases the demand for the pen or the pencil you are using, isn't it? So henceforth, this would not be the right statement. The good is an inferior good and income of the consumers increases. When people, the good itself is an inferior good. So why do rich people want to go for using an inferior good? Isn't it? See, take the case of a public transport. I don't say it's, I'm simply saying, of course, it's a transport service, but even when it comes to, tell me, if you are earning a salary of 3 lakh rupees per annum, would you like to take the same road transporters corporation service? I don't really think so, isn't it? Okay, so same is the logic you could apply. Okay, inferior, isn't it? When the income of the consumers increases, okay, and inferior good, people consumption or preference to consume inferior good obviously decreases, and its price falls. Obviously, that's again a mere common sense, isn't it? Price fall, demand rises. So 1 and 4 happens to be the most appropriate answers, and that gives you an option A. With reference to urban cooperative banks in India, consider the following statement. They are supervised and regulated by local boards set up by the state governments. They can issue equity shares and preference shares. They were brought under the purview of Banking Regulation Act 1949 through an amendment in 1966. Of course, when the banking, when most Banking Regulation Act has been passed, most of you been aware of the fact the government is not much into banking. Those days, the banking used to be available, or the services used to be only catered to the masses. Sorry, not to the masses, it's classes, mostly urban people. Only after 1969 nationalization of banks and the government started simply doing very much hard for financial inclusion, you have these cooperative banks, regional rural banks, and government started nationalizing, isn't it? But whether you are aware of these two facts or not, let's start with this. Those people who have gone through newspaper, most of you might have this confusion. Almost all cooperative societies, like any other cooperative society, maybe for a sugar mill or a dairy, because cooperative societies were very successful in dairy industry and also sugar industry. So you might also have noticed, isn't it, the government appoints some people, these are what we call nominated posts. And the societies, the members of the societies do elect a person, isn't it? So what is this particular board, or what is this so-called nominated member, or the chairman of the, let's say take the case of district cooperative central banks, you would be having a chairman who is mostly nominated by the government in power. What is their role? See, at max, since it is a cooperative society where people happens to participate in it, you have a right to vote in it, isn't it? So something similar to a very private company or public company which has issued a stock, people have a right to know what is going on. People have a right to participate in a decision making to an extent, but they don't have the control, because that's not a permanent body. It has been appointed by the government, and that particular fellow who has been appointed, or the board who has been appointed, is not going to be permanent, isn't it? And of course, anyway, you are also aware of the fact recently, it's been hardly some 3-4 months back, you might have come across the newspaper, because of this so-called dominance of these politicians and other people, within the management of the urban cooperative banks, there's been large siphoning of funds in the Maharashtra, and that's the basic reason this particular issue being in news, and the RBI now slowly happens to take the responsibility of regulating them. So the first statement itself happens to be a false statement, incorrect statement, I would say. So if you could eliminate one, that doesn't mean you could eliminate A, C, D, that gives you 2 and 3. That's it. You don't need to. If you have gone through the newspaper and you notice this fact that they are not regulated, they are not regulated. In fact, that terms itself, it gives you a clue. they don't have a right to regulate it. So, and if you could eliminate one, that has been, okay, you really don't need to be aware of whether it could issue an equity share, preference share. In fact, you don't need to know what is the difference between equity share and a preference share, because most of the people neglect, okay, looking deep into these money markets and capital markets, and that's the reason, in spite of not aware of the fact what exactly is the difference of equity and a preference share, but if you have gone through newspaper and understood, okay, realize the fact that the RBI is the one who has taken the responsibility to regulate these banks, then you could eliminate one, and obviously, okay, if you could eliminate one, A, C, D could be eliminated, and that gives you an option B. That's it. Indian government bond yields are influenced by which of the following? So before going to, let me make it say what is a bond yield. I hope you understand what's the yield, returns. That's it. So if a bond, let's say a bond having a face value of 10,000 rupees, face value of 10,000 rupees, okay, promises you to pay an interest rate of 1,000 rupees per annum. Let's say 10% per annum. Just imagine. So this 10 upon 10,000, okay, I mean the profit or simply the returns upon your, okay, investment. So this is 1,000 rupees or 10% interest is calculated on the face value of the bond. Let's say you buy the bond at a face value of 10,000 rupees and you are receiving, okay, 1,000 rupees of profit. So this gives you, okay, expressed as a percentage, then that could be called as a yield. So look at it, this is the price at which you have purchased the bond, and you end up paying more than 10,000, the yield decreases, isn't it? Because the denominator increases, the yield decreases. So that's mean I could say yield is inversely proportional to, I mean yield, okay, in a way decreases when the bond price increases, or it increases when the bond price decreases. And you might also be aware of the fact the bond prices, okay, decreases when the interest rates increases, isn't it? So that's how you get to know. Okay, at the end of the day, the yield of the bond happens to be based upon the value of the bond, the price of the bond, and the price of bond is based upon the demand for the bond, isn't it? The demand for depends upon how many people are willing to buy these bonds, and when do people would be happy to buy the bond? When they happen to, okay, expect, I mean when they believe that they are getting a decent returns upon it. So now let's come back to the question, actions of United States Federal Reserve. So you might be thinking, how come, okay, Indian government bond yield might happen to have an effect on Federal Reserve? In fact, even this happens to be in the news for the past, okay, almost since 2013 the story started. When the Federal Reserve started making an announcement, we are going to taper, okay, whatever what they call as a quantitative easing, we are going to taper, we are going to reduce the amount of money we are going to pump, we are pumping in by buying bonds. It's been in the news. So imagine if the Federal Reserve of United States of America makes dollars costly, I mean to say, imagine it goes for a tight money policy, and the returns upon the investment in US happens to increase, then most of the people who are invested in India, they would like to take their capital from India and would invest somewhere in a country like United States of America, where they happen to get a decent returns. When the willingness of people to buy or invest in markets in India decreases, obviously what happens, the demand for the bonds in India, or the demand for so-called financial instruments, whether it could be bond or equity, whatever it could be. But here in this case, the demand for bond decreases. When the demand decreases, the price of the bond gets affected. So anything, so here in this case, the very simple logic is, how does a bond price, I mean how does a bond yield gets influenced? Okay, whenever the bond price gets influenced, the bond yield happens to influence. And what influences the bond price? Simple, Federal Reserve, any policy action of Federal Reserve. If American policy action itself, I mean policy action of Federal Reserve happens to have an impact, that obviously makes any actions of Reserve Bank of India would also have an effect on bond prices. So at the end of the day, it is the demand for the bond determines the bond price, and it is the bond price, the price at which you are buying, determines your yield, isn't it? So any initiative or any action by either the government or because of the action, okay, actions of the government or the RBI, which might have an effect on the bond price, would have an effect on the bond yield. So that's it. If you might have noticed it, even short-term interest rates, inflation, when the inflation is high, isn't it? Get what I'm saying? I don't really think people would be happy simply by, okay, converting their money into the form of bonds, which pays a certain amount of interest rates, isn't it? Because your inflation rate is much high than what the bond is yielding, the real rate of interest would end up becoming negative in many cases, and that's the reason people would not be happy. At times of high inflation, people would not be happy buying bonds, isn't it? So when times of high inflation, since people are not interested in saving money or converting their money in the form of bonds, that decreases the demand for bond. and that itself is more than enough to influence your bond yield. So henceforth, all three statements happens to be the right statements, and that gives you the option D. Okay, now let's move to the next question. Consider the following. In fact, to an extent, I could say most of you might not be confident about answering this question. Consider the following statement: foreign currency convertible bonds. I'll just read the question and then come back to the explanation. Foreign institutional investment with certain conditions, global deposit receipts, non-resident external deposits. Which of the above can be included in foreign direct investment? Okay, look at again the statement, which of the above can be. Okay, it's not been asked you directly which of the, which is exactly the can be included in foreign direct investment. I mean, what can you consider as a foreign direct investment? Again, those students, whoever is going through newspaper, might be aware of the fact. Okay, so the very fundamental difference between FDI and FPI, whatever you might have studied in your books, is simply FDI, any investment that happens to be long lasting is what we consider as the FDI. Any investment, okay, that happens to be unfair. That's the basic reason whenever people ask you a question related to FPI, you'd say, sir, the problem with FPI is volatile in nature. You don't know for how long time the money stays in the markets. But in 2004, there's been a major change in the definition. Okay, what does the government says, or simply what does the change in 14 is foreign institutional investor or any foreign institutional investor who happen to invest more than 10%, who happen to invest more than 10% in the equity or 10%, any FII more than 10% in a particular company. Let's say in one company, if someone happens to buy more than 10% of the shares, I don't really think, don't you think that a guy who invested more than or who purchased more than 10% of stake in a company or 10% of shares in a company, isn't it? I don't think, unlike any other institutional investor or a portfolio investor who had hardly purchased some 0.1 or 0.2% stake, would end up running overnight from this country when the economy is underperforming. No, that's not the case. So, a guy who happened to buy or an institution who happened to bring in and purchase 10% of a stake in a company or 10% of shares of a company, isn't it? More or less happens to be investing money, isn't it? Happens to be a large proportion of the company, and that's the basic reason. In 14, there's a change. And what does it say? An FII of 10%, more than 10%, in any particular company would be considered as an FDI, because at 10%, see, take the case of Amazon. How much do you really think Jeff Bezos owns in Amazon? 14%, that's it. Hardly 14%, is the share capital, I mean, the shares, isn't it? 14% shares is what Mr. Jeff Bezos owns. He doesn't own all 100% stake. Similarly, if a foreign institutional investor happened to buy 10% shares of a company, one particular company, isn't it? So that obviously could be regarded as a direct investment in that particular company or in that particular sector, because it's going to be more or less stable. And that was the change. And if you are aware of the fact and you know this is right, isn't it? So if 2 is right, that eliminates B and D. Now let's look at fourth one. So since you need to eliminate, isn't it? So let's look at the fourth, non-resident external deposit. External deposit has been the NRIs, isn't it? Let's say in the form of FCNRB, foreign currency non-resident bank account. So the money that the non-residents happen to deposit in a bank is as simple as the deposits we make in a bank, isn't it? So can I say my deposit in a bank, can I guarantee as my domestic, as a domestic, similar, domestic investment? Similarly, if some foreigner, I mean, if the NRI happen to deposit some money in a bank, can we really consider it, isn't it? So that's the basic question. And since we cannot really consider this as an investment, because what is that here in this case, some NRI happen to park his funds in a bank which is paying him a decent rate of interest. There ends the story. But when it comes to a global depository receipt, so these are the receipts issued by our mostly these are the receipts that has been issued in Europe for the sake of raising capital from the markets, mostly in Europe, isn't it? So this is one way of raising capital from abroad. And foreign currency convertible bond could be convertible. What if the bond could be converted into equity, 100% equity, isn't it? So you have different types of convertible, partially convertible debentures, isn't it? Fully convertible. So if you happen to sell a bond which you could be converted into foreign currency, or the bond is issued in a foreign currency and convertible does mean it would be converted later into equity. So in such case, you could see, isn't it? Both 1 and 3 happens to be the right statements, and fourth is something you could easily exclude. So fourth is not the right, and second is the most appropriate. In fact, even though you're not clear with 1 and 3, that gives you an option, that is A. That's it. The effect of devaluation, consider the following statement, the effect of devaluation of a currency is that it necessarily, and he happened to use this word necessarily, isn't it? So that's the term that you might be very much conscious with. Necessarily. Okay. So because I have seen some of students simply saying, sir, it might, when the currency decreases, the goods and services of this country becomes relatively cheaper in terms of foreign currency, and that's what's the reason he happened to use. Improves the competitiveness of the domestic exports in the foreign markets. That means our goods in the foreign markets becomes cheaper. How come? Let's say this particular pen, here is a pen which costs 10 rupees. And imagine dollar happens to now right now fetches 70 rupees. That's mean a guy who has a dollar in his pocket, he can buy 70 rupees can buy 7 pence. But if you devalue currency, isn't it, somewhere from 70 to 90, it does mean a guy who has a dollar in his pocket now can buy 9 pence, isn't it? So, it does mean our goods becomes relatively cheaper. That's the basic reason they happen to say that improves the competitiveness of our domestic exports in foreign markets. So, the foreigners, whoever happens to buy our goods in terms of dollars, for them, since our currency has become cheaper, that makes our goods cheaper, and hence for the first option happens to be true. Then the third could be, so again you might be asking, so when our exports become cheaper, that results in increase in exports. So obviously even that third could also be true, but third could be true, maybe, but it's not necessary. Maybe you might all be aware of the so-called J-curve effect, which I am not going to again discuss now, isn't it? So whoever happened to go through the devaluation or depreciation, you might have come across this fact, isn't it? What is said to be called a J-curve effect? How the trade balance initially gets worsened because of depreciation or devaluation of a currency. So you cannot guarantee. So this is something necessary. You cannot guarantee this might happen. So third could be obviously. So that leaves 2 and 3. Is it? Now let's out of A, B. Increases the foreign value of domestic currency. See, the meaning of devaluation itself does mean fall in value or simply reducing the value of our currency in terms of the other currency. Then obviously the second statement happens to be absolutely incorrect. So that leaves you with an option A. Which one of the following effects of creation of black money in India has been the main cause of worry to the government of India? Again, you might also be simply saying, sir, there are large amount of black money that is flowing into or that is being used to finance these political parties. Maybe these things might be happening in this country, but the most appropriate, if you ask for that matter, isn't it? Mere rationality helps you to come up with the reason why the government is mostly bothered, because black money does mean unaccounted money. If you don't account your income or if you don't account your gains, that does mean you are not paying a simple penny as a tax, and the most biggest concern happens to be comes with in the form of loss of revenue to the state exchequer due to the evasion of taxes. Isn't it? So some of you might be arguing, sir, even the other could be right. There might be, I have seen some of the people happen to say, I have seen some people doing this, doing that. But out of all this four, what seems to be the most appropriate, that is the major concern for the government, not only for the government, for the entire state, is the state is losing the revenue. Because people are not reporting the income they are making. That's it. Which one of the following is likely to be the most inflationary in its effect? Frankly speaking, it's a previous question. Only thing, they might have changed the order or they might have simply changed the sentence construction, but the most inflationary in its effect. When does inflation, what results in increase in inflation? Simple. Inflation does mean rise in prices. Isn't it? Inflation does mean rise in prices. So when do price rise? When do price rise? My friends, when the demand rises. Price rise is because rise in demand. So when the demand rises, when the economy is growing, isn't it? When the nation or simply either the RBI or simply the government goes for a expansionary policies, that results in inflation. So repayment of public debt. Let's say the government happened to repay the public debt. How does the government repays the public debt? Or simply just imagine, out of the total public debt, let's say part of it, the government, whichever owes money to the people, has repaid it. Does mean it happens to get the bond from the market and repaid the money. So does mean now people have some more money because they happen to give the bond, in return they got the money paid. Isn't it? So now people have more money to spend, and that results in demand. So to an extent it could be right. Borrowing from the public to finance a budget deficit. So if you borrow money from the public and the government is borrowing, for what reason government might be borrowing? Of course, again the intention of government is to finance its deficit. So why do government is borrowing? In fact, again it is to spend, isn't it? Even that might borrowing from the banks to finance budget deficit, isn't it? Whether you borrow from the public or finance, but why is the government borrowing? Most of you would think the purpose of government borrowing is not to save in other bank or not to save with someone else, isn't it? It is again to spend. Maybe after the government spending might result in inflation, but if you look at which is the most inflationary needs affected, okay, he didn't ask you which causes inflation, which is out of all these actions, which is most inflationary. And let's look at the fourth one, creation of new money to finance a budget deficit. So here in this case, it is the money in the economy that's being circulated, but in the last case, it is new currency that's been introduced. Without any increase in goods and services, you are introducing new money, isn't it? So that's the basic reason. Okay, so it would have two different kinds of factors. One, it might increase in the demand. The other way, it results in fall in value of money because you have more money that has been pushed into the economy. So that's the basic reason. Okay, out of all these four options, what really happens to be the most inflationary? That's D. And in fact, I guess if you have gone through previous papers, in fact, that's been a previous question and you don't need to worry about it. The money multiplier in economy increases with which one of the following? Money multiplier. Maybe you might have seen the money multiplier could be calculated as 1 by reserve ratio. A high poured money, let's say a high poured money, let me reference M0, introduced in the economy gets multiplied by 1 by RR. So RR stands for reserve ratio. So that is how we happen to calculate money multiplier. I guess every one of you might be aware of the fact. Okay, let me not prove this in this particular session. It makes this session very lengthy. So the money multiplier, ideally when the reserve ratio, it's as simple as that. Imagine if the RBI asked bankers to keep more money in the form of reserves with you. Maintain more money in the form of reserves. Let's say 90% of the money they mobilize in the form of deposits. If the banks keep it with themselves, that means they have only 10% to let. So just use your logic, mere common sense. If banks keep 90% and only lend 10%, do you really think that results in increase in supply of money and credit in the economy? No, definitely not. Only banks has an opportunity to lend more money and keeping less reserves. Even that could be used, even though you are not aware of this so-called concept of money multiplier. But one could easily say increase in cash reserve ratio or increase in statutory liquidity ratio. For that matter, any increase in reserves. If the banks been asked to keep more money with them as a reserve, no matter whether in the form of cash or any other form, if the banks are maintaining more money that they raise from the deposit in the form of reserves with them, they would obviously have very less amount of money to lend. And when they lend very less amount of money, that doesn't mean the credit supply is very less. And that gives you, isn't it, that simply helps you to conclude the fact that the total credit supply, the money supply at the end of the day would be less when the banks been asked to maintain more reserves, isn't it? So henceforth, A, B cannot be the right option. And let's look at increasing the habit, banking habit of people. Got it? So now look at it, only when I happen to park my money, let's say all the money I earn, if I happen to stash it under the bed. So that is the money not serving the purpose of any person, isn't it? Only when I happen to keep my money in a bank, that's how the money could be circulated in the economy. What if people happen to earn and they happen to stash it under the bed? And imagine a case, of course that's very strange to happen, but imagine in the case everyone whoever is earning in this country is getting paid in the form of cash, and everyone whoever is getting paid in the form of cash is simply keeping this money under their bed and they are stashing under bed and they are not simply depositing any bank. Just imagine, isn't it? What would be the total money supply at the end of the day? Isn't it? So that itself could be helping you to come up with. C would be the appropriate answer. But let's also look at D. Increase in population of the country. How could increase in population could guarantee? In such case, money multiplier should be high in country like China, and second, it should be obviously in country like India, isn't it? So that has nothing to do with the most appropriate answer happens to be C. Increase in banking habits of the people. Okay. So with reference to Indian economy, demand pull inflation can be caused or increased by which of the following? Demand pull inflation. Okay, you might have studied demand pull inflation, cost push inflation. No matter whatever it could be, inflation simply does mean a phenomenon of rise in prices. And I was given 5 different options. You might be thinking, is it required to go through all the? I'm just giving. Of course, I will be explaining the rest of the things. But like the last one, rising interest rates. In one of the previous question already happened to explain, isn't it? Rising interest rates rather than being an expansion, it's a contractionary nature. It discourages people to borrow and spend. It discourages people to go for less of credit, isn't it? So that itself would be giving you an option. Rising interest rates rather than creating demand, it would simply reduce the demand. It is contractionary in nature. So if you have noticed 5 would not be an appropriate answer, you could eliminate 3, B, C, D, and that gives you an option 1, 2, 4. Frankly speaking, if someone has noticed, just had a glance of all the 5 options and realized the 5 really doesn't help you to, doesn't create an inflation, that's it. Whether demand pull, cost pull, that's altogether different ball game, but rising interest rates is contractionary in nature. That results in falling demand, and the demand itself happens to contract. How come there could be a chance of rise in prices? So if you could eliminate 5, that gives you an option A, isn't it? 1, 2, 4. So, but now let's come back and look at it. Expansionary policy. Expansionary policy, it has been either RBI or the government. Anyone could go for a stimulus, isn't it? So, if you go for an expansionary policy by reducing interest rates or by reducing tax rates or by the government taking the initiative of spending more, like in the previous example we have seen, how could the government help an economy to overcome a recession? By going for an expansionary policy, spend money, isn't it? That's what we call fiscal stimulus. And that's what it is. The second statement is in fact a part of first one. Expansionary policy does mean it could be an expansionary policy practice or adopted by the RBI or it could be by the government. Third one, inflation indexing wages. So if you index your wage, your wage happens to be linked with the rate of increase in prices, and imagine if your if your salary is increasing with increase in interest. Of course, this is something like an effect that is the result of inflation. Isn't it? Your wage increases because of inflation, but your your wage which is being indexed with inflation itself might not be the cause. In fact, it is an effect. This would be a cause and this would be an effect. When do your wage rises? Of course, when wage rises or when income rises, people spend more, that results in increase in demand, and when the demand rises, obviously there would be a demand pull inflation. But here in this case, look at it, third one says inflation indexing wages. If your wage is been indexed or it's been linked with your inflation. So when there is an inflation, there would be increase in wage, and that wage and increase in salary might result in more demand, but this happens only when there is an inflation. But that doesn't mean that this itself is going to result in a demand for inflation. You got it? So this is an effect rather, I would say. So henceforth, anyway, here in this case, you don't need to worry about it, because if you've been aware of the fact rising interest rates really doesn't help, rather it contracts the demand, then option A would be obviously the correct option. With reference to India, consider the following statements. The retail investors through Demat account and invest in treasury bills and Government of India debt bonds and Government of India's debt bonds in primary market. These days, my friends, the entire YouTube has been flooded with the videos that people simply started teaching people how to make money in stock markets, and I guess most of you might already started experimenting. And this is a universal fact, everyone has been aware, isn't it? So you could simply start buying, or you could start lending money to the Government of India by simply opening a Demat account and start simply buying government bonds and treasury bills. I think there's hardly any confusion in it. These are the two statements that is more or less factual. But and again, the negotiated dealing system order matching is a government securities trading platform of the Reserve Bank of India, and it's right. Hardly anything to explain, and of course it is owned by or managed by RBI. The Central Depository Services Limited is a jointly promoted by RBI of India, Reserve Bank of India, and Bombay Stock Exchange. Of course, it's partly right, but it's not by RBI. There are some other banks like SBI and some banks like some private banks together happen to be the one who is promoting this so-called Central Depository Service Limited. In fact, those guys who opened a Demat account might also receive a mail from Central Depository Services also. Isn't it? Those whoever happen to open an account would also be receiving sometimes from the Central Depository Services. Maybe if you happen to spend some time reading the mail you received, you could also be aware of the fact, isn't it? What exactly is Central Depository Services? And the fact is that the RBI has nothing to do with this. Of course, in good old days, SEBI used to have some stake, but right now RBI has nothing to do with it. So leaving aside 3 gives you an option B. That's 1 and 2. With reference to water credit, again my friend, this is a factual question. Just because there is a credit and microfinance, I have been asked to discuss as an economy, but this is a mere current affair Okay, so there is an organization that happens to come up with an idea in order to ensure that the poor and the people who could not afford to spend money on these so-called increasing prices of filters and all these things. So in order to ensure these people would be getting some financial support, okay, so that they could afford, okay, good water, okay, clean drinking water and better sanitation facilities. So there is you could say something like an NGO like organization has come up with an initiative. It puts microfinance tools to the work to water and sanitation sector. Yes, it's right. That's in fact the objective. It is a global initiative launched. Of course, it's a global initiative, but not under the aegis of World Health Organization, World Bank. Okay. So again, this is a trap. Most of you would be thinking this is something to do with water and sanitation, and that is something to do with microfinance. That is for the sake of poor people, and there's water and sanitation involved. So maybe WHO would be promoting, and there is a microcredit involved, a microfinance maybe World Bank would be taking, and that too it's a developmental project. Might be the reason most of you might end up falling in a trap, and that's the very basic purpose. UPSC might have included this. So if you could eliminate that, okay, that gives you an option. That's it. If you eliminate second one, okay, but if you have been confused, and most of you, because it's not necessary, you might have gone through this so-called news about water credit. I don't think you might have, okay, observed, isn't it? And there many of you might end up falling a trap, because obviously we end up correlating. This is water and sanitation related, so maybe, and it's an international initiative, maybe World Health Organization might be fine, okay, supporting it. And so it is to do with microfinance and a developmental initiative, maybe World Bank. Okay, so that's how people end up falling in a trap, and that's the reason they happen to include this statement. In India, the central bank's function is the lender of last resort, usually refers to each of the following. Okay, you might have studied the functions of RBI, isn't it? RBI happens to be the one who frames monetary policy, regulates banking industry. Okay, so as part of it, whoever happens to discuss this so-called topic of monetary policy and RBI, they also use the word called. One of the very major or important function of RBI, it acts as a lender of last resort. Last resort has been the final option, I could say. Okay, so we are aware of the fact, isn't it? RBI lends money, RBI acts as a banker to the bankers, RBI acts as a banker to the governments too. So at max, you would be having a doubt with respect to 2 and 3. Lending to trade and industry bodies when they fall into borrow from other sources, RBI has nothing to do with it. This is something you could easily relate. Maybe at max you might be having, and that too they have given option B and C. 2 only, 2, 3. Is it because RBI provides liquidity when the banks are in need, and RBI also supports governments when they happen to be in need, isn't it? But out of these two, okay, since you've been given B, C, what happens to be the most appropriate, isn't it? So the very basic purpose, or the purpose of using the term called last resort, is it is the bankers in times of the crisis, when they experience a shortfall of capital, they have an opportunity, that is as a last resort or the last, okay, option. They could simply raise some money from the RBI. In fact, that is what's the basic purpose, one of the responsibility of RBI. Okay, maybe you might have studied about the scheduled banks, and that point of time you might have been realized the fact RBI, okay, happens to be helping these banks in times of need, and this is how, in the name of, okay, in the name of acting as a last resort to lend, okay, RBI happens to the purpose for these banks, and that's the reason. Though I don't say RBI doesn't lend money to the governments in need, but the very purpose of using the statement of last resort has been when banks are badly in need of cash and they cannot afford to raise money from the markets, okay, the last resort obviously happens to be RBI, and RBI serves the purpose. And that's the reason 2 happens to be the, okay, appropriate statement. And that's the, okay, total questions. Okay, thank you.